You're all set. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I will call the Monday, March 23rd, 2023 meeting of the Community Preservation Committee to order. Please note that tonight's meeting is recorded and broadcast on Channel 18, and in accordance with Mass General Law 30A, Section 20, the chair must inquire whether anyone is taping this meeting and to please make their presence known. Seeing none, we'll move to the first item for discussion. It's a discussion with Assistant Town Attorney Kathleen Connolly regarding conservation restrictions, historic restrictions, recreation restrictions, and housing restrictions.
Do you have to do a roll call?
Oh, I'm sorry. Very good, Mr. Lee. Excellent. The roll call. Terry Duenas.
Here.
Marilyn Fifield.
Here.
Deb Converse.
Here.
Catherine Garofoli.
Here.
Tom Lee.
Here.
Farley Lewis.
Here.
Steve Robichaud.
Here.
James Tenalia.
Here.
Lindsay Council is present. Thanks for that. All right. Kate, I guess you're up.
Okay. I don't have the agenda in front of me, although I did read it several times today. Is the first discussion the general one and the second one is Armstrong Kelly Park, or is it the reverse?
No, the first one is the general discussion on the various types of restrictions, what they entail for us, and how we go about bringing them forward.
Okay. So under the Community Preservation Act, if property is acquired or being acquired with CPA funds, then you can have a permanent restriction or a perpetual restriction, which is not limited in time. And under the statute, there are, it's under Chapter 184, it's sections 31 through 33. Those are the statutes that govern conservation restrictions, preservation restrictions, agricultural preservation restrictions, and then sort of a separate one is watershed protection restrictions. It's sometimes considered that there are four, but if you separate those two out, agriculture and watershed, it's five, because the fifth one being affordable housing. So that the limitation there is, as I noted, under the statute, under the Community Preservation Act, Chapter 44B, Section 12, those permanent restrictions can be applied to properties that are being purchased with CPA funds. If it's a property that was not purchased with CPA funds and it's, it's private or it was just otherwise purchased some different way, then you can still have a restriction, but it has to be much more limited in time. And there's another statute that governs that. It's also Chapter 184. Those are all the major restriction on land statutes, but it's Section 23 that limits the duration of time to 30 years. So there are pros and cons to doing permanent restrictions versus more temporary ones. But again, the major consideration before you can even consider doing a permanent restriction, meaning permanent in time, is whether the property is purchased with CPA funds. If it is, then that's a route to go. I've done a lot of the mostly conservation restrictions on properties. We have a bunch in Barnstable that we've done and are doing. That requires the state. Massachusetts is actually the only state in the entire country that requires that the state approve local conservation restrictions. So you can have them worked out with a private party and a town and or a land trust that might get involved. Sometimes the Conservation Commission will hold the restriction and it's owned by a private party. Sometimes a land trust, a town might want to hire a land trust to do the management of the property. But even if the parties don't involve the state at all, which most of the time they don't, the state of, or the Commonwealth of Massachusetts requires that all permanent restrictions be reviewed and approved by the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. So they weigh in a local decision, in our case by our town council and the town manager. The way the statute's written, both approvals are needed, but it's mainly the town manager that's mentioned in the statute, have to approve restrictions. even if the town's not involved in it, hasn't given CPA funding, our Concom isn't going to hold the property, just because it's within our borders, the town has to approve the restriction, but it still has to go to the state, and they do a line-by-line, word-for-word review, and often come back with changes that they require us to make. So, but once those are done, those can be they can be perpetual, and they get recorded at the Registry of Deeds. That's sort of a general overview. I mean, we can do temporary restrictions for things like recreation and really any of those topic areas that I mentioned. Temporary restrictions can be done, and that's typically no more than 30 years. So that's something that you could consider on properties that were not, you could consider it for any property, but it would be especially applicable to properties that were not purchased with CPA funds. So that's sort of the general discussion. I don't know if the commission has, or the committee has, a preferred approach that you want to start taking in the future, but those are the main distinctions. If the property is not being purchased with CPA funds, you can't consider the permanent restrictions, but you can if it is being purchased with CPA funds.
I have a question.
Okay.
We don't acquire any property with historic restrictions, and yet they're permanent.
Yep. Yeah, historic restrictions, those are under, yeah, that's not, I'm just looking at the list again. That's not one of the ones that's governed by Chapter 184. So that's why it's like in a different category.
Okay, well, that settles that then. In a recreation situation, if you are expending a large amount of money, of the people's money, and you want to grant those funds, wouldn't acquiring a right of easement over the property in perpetuity be an acquisition of an interest in that property?
Well, you can't require a restriction because it's got to be voluntary. Obviously, you also don't have to give CPA money to an applicant. Even if they're eligible, it doesn't mean they're entitled. But a restriction has to be something that the property owner agrees to.
Of course.
And then you work out the terms of it. Obviously, if you give a lot of money to a project, there are things that CPA can require that they do to, have signage that recognizes that the town, through its CPC, has granted funds. And you can ask them to voluntarily enter into a restriction. Under the statute, though, unless it's one of those permanent ones, it's limited to 30 years under Chapter 184, Section 23.
So if our rules would require that a permanent restriction be placed on a project when CPA funds are granted, regarding, say a recreation project or even a housing, but whatever it is,
mm-hmm.
and they decline, we don't have to award them funds, correct?
It's always discretionary. You never have to award them funds. I don't think that you can require that. Well, you can't require anybody to sign a restriction, but you can tell them that it's a condition of getting the funding. But again, to do a permanent restriction, the way the statute is worded, it's got to be a property that's acquired with CPA funds. And oftentimes that'll be the case, but a lot of times people that are applicants for CPA funds have not actually purchased their property with CPA funds. They just want to use it for one of the categories.
Okay. Any other questions, members?
What's the typical timeline for the state approval? It seems like they have a bit of a backlog, and I don't know if that's a temporary backlog because of COVID or if that's just standard operating procedure.
That's a very good question because that's been nagging at those of us who do CRs for some time now. They've been extremely backlogged. I think it might be partly COVID. I think another huge component was the main CR reviewer at the state, and this is just for CRs, not for the other types of restrictions, had to leave his position and thought that he'd be able to continue working remotely when he moved out of state, but that was not the case. So he left, and it took them a really long time to find somebody to replace him. I think they're a little bit faster now. I just know the ones that I'm doing for our Conservation Commission are suddenly starting to move along. I was getting comments back over the weekend on 7 different CRs that I reviewed like a year ago. And of course, it's still a bit frustrating because the new reviewer is going back and raising points that I already had resolved with the previous reviewer. So we kind of started over again a little bit, but I brought that to her attention. Let's not rehash these things. We've been through that already. So they are picking up. They had a backlog. I think they're really starting to catch up. Maybe that's just wishful thinking on my part. But I think generally, in response to your question about how long does it typically take, it can take a year. I think lately it's been taking more like a year and a half, but in past years, and I've been doing CRs for a while, I was actually on they revise the state model every once in a while, and I was on the 2009 committee of attorneys, which now seems so long ago. So I worked on one of the revisions to one of the state models, and they revise them sometimes twice a year. They do revise them pretty frequently. Sometimes you'll go a few years without a revision. But back when I first started doing these in the late 90s, they were going through in 4 to 6 months. It wasn't taking as long as it's been taking the last couple of years.
Great, thanks.
I appreciate that.
Anyone else? Questions about restrictions? One question I did have regarding housing restrictions, does the committee actually have to approve those? And on a housing project, I mean, should they be brought to the group to approve them, or is it just assumed that they're going to be fine and we don't need to see them again? What I'm referencing is we turn our funds over to the trust, housing trust, and then they do the work and, do the all the paperwork, but we don't actually see the restrictions or need to deal with them again, do we? How does that?
I'd honestly have to look into that to be certain, but I'm pretty sure that you don't, because you refer it over to the housing trust and they make what you could do is CPC could take a vote to make a certain recommendation.
Yeah, we don't specifically or have not done that in our motions to award funding to the trust.
Right.
Because, well, maybe I'm out of order, but, housing has so many restrictions from, all the different entities that are involved. It really has never come up as an issue.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Deb, if you want to weigh in on that part of it, but it was just as, if we're lacking anything by not doing anything, that would be important too.
Yeah, I think we should check with the trust. It is true that most of the funding sources have a restriction, but I don't think it would hurt for us to double check that because, we want to make sure that it remains affordable. And it should be filed with the deed, but we have to make sure the trust is doing that as well, I think.
Okay. Well, Kate, I'd ask for your help on that, whatever documents they're creating.
Yeah, Kathleen.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the one across the street from the middle school there on 28, the 10 units that we acquired.
Yeah.
I never did see anything and wasn't thinking about it.
All right, you and I can talk offline about that one, Lindsay, and I can look into it a little bit further.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good question.
Go ahead, Tom.
No, just a good question, Lindsay, because we have not think about it. And so maybe we should check on the paperwork legally. What is the requirement for us?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, look into that.
Yeah.
And the other thing I think as well is, and we used to do this and we've sort of fallen out of it, but Kate used to have our town attorney's office actually draft motions, general motions for us that we could then plug in the project info.
Sure, I do that for some of our boards and commissions. I'm happy to do it for CPC.
Yeah, it would be, particularly where there's a restriction going to be involved. We'd want to make sure we get that right the first time through.
Sure.
I hate to go go through the whole process or something and, you got to revote it. So we'll check on motions with Kate. Okay. Anyone else? No other discussion? All right. I think we can end that discussion. and move on to the next item. Discussion with Assistant Town Attorney Kathleen Connolly regarding options for potential recreation restriction on Armstrong Kelly Park, 675 Main Street, Osterville, Mass. 02655, map 141, parcel 038. All right, Kate, you're on with that one.
Lindsay,
Okay.
before you start, Kate, shall I recuse myself?
Oh, that's correct. I believe your company has some involvement with this project.
Correct.
Yeah, then if you probably should recuse yourself. I mean, if you feel that you can be completely impartial, you still have to file a disclosure with the town clerk. And given that we're having the conversation now,
Yeah. I should recuse myself.
All right, Tom, thank you. All right, Kate. You're
Okay.
on again.
So this project, which you all probably are very familiar with, and I'm familiar with it as well. I did go on the site walk last July, was it this?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. And we explained to the project engineer, I forget exactly what the title was, that, there's certain things to be eligible for CPC funds. You've got to be able to show. And their property was not purchased with CPC funds or CPA funds. And what they wanted to do was open space, but you can only do rehabilitation and restoration on a property with respect to open space if it's a property that was purchased with CPA funds. And this was not. So we explained to them that if you can come up with a recreation component, then that would make you eligible. So they redesigned their project. And we were kind of assisting them in that regard by telling them what they needed to do to become eligible. So they redesigned the project, and the committee, I wasn't at the meeting, so I'm not exactly sure. I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, Lindsay and others, but I don't think you voted to give them the money. I think it was contingent on a recreation restriction. And that's when I got further involved in this one, which is with respect to the recreation restriction, they refused to sign it and they hired an attorney. And just for the record, I just want to clarify, it's not anything that any of you would necessarily care about, but as an attorney, it's something that I care about. And I want to make sure it's understood that their attorney did not violate any ethics rules, but he sent a letter to me, and somehow one of the trustees, it was copied. This was in the agenda package, and I did explain to Lindsay and Ellen that it should not be part of it because it's an attorney to attorney letter. It was a letter that their attorney sent to me explaining what their objections were with respect to the recreation restriction. So I've had some conversations with him and reviewed their concerns and reviewed the statutes and all that. But I looked at the letter. He did copy it. It's to me and it's copied to his client. He did not copy the committee. And the rule is attorneys have these rules of ethics, and we actually have to take an exam at the same time we take the bar exam, but it's completely separate. And one of the requirements in this huge book of rules is that if someone is represented by counsel, the attorney for one side cannot talk to the other side directly. So since they hired an attorney, you guys now have me, he and I can talk to each other. He cannot talk to you. And I cannot talk to anybody from the trustees about this project because they've now hired an attorney. So I just wanted to be clear on the record. He didn't send that letter that you all saw, and it's harmless that you saw it, but he did not send that directly to you. He sent it to me, and one of his clients, I guess, delivered it to CPC, which he told me he has spoken with her about that. So anyway, as far as the terms of the recreation restriction, this is one of those where we really cannot impose a permanent restriction because the property is privately owned. It was not purchased with CPA funds, but we can negotiate a restriction with them. The restriction that we gave them in draft form said it was for 30 years at one point, but it used the word, I believe it said 30 years, but I know it also said perpetual in the title and several times throughout, and that's what they were concerned about. Now, obviously, if CPC is giving them a substantial amount of money, we can expect them to put a restriction on for at least a period of time. Unfortunately, the statute doesn't allow a permanent restriction on this property because it wasn't purchased with CPA funds. If we got them to agree to a restriction, it's possible that we could require more than 30 years. But even then, it could be challenged because the statute says 30 years. Unless it's one of these that was purchased with CPA funds, in which case you can do a perpetual. So they have tentatively, through their attorneys, said that they would agree. And this is not a meeting that we could go into executive session. So that's why we're talking about it in open session, but I'm kind of being somewhat cryptic because we are in negotiations with them. But this didn't fall under one of the reasons that we could go into executive session, because it's not litigation. It's not purchasing property, because that's one of the things that if the town was considering buying a property, which CPC could sometimes do, but we're not in this case, so it doesn't fall under that one either. And the other component, which I could have mentioned, I suppose, in the general discussion as well, because it applies all the time. If we were to require, and this again this doesn't apply to Armstrong Kelly Park because that property cannot have a permanent restriction because it wasn't purchased with CPA funds. But for a property that is, there has to be someone, and I think I touched briefly on this before, but there has to be a party that holds the restriction, and it can't be the same person or entity that owns the property. So either the town would have to, if the town was going to impose a permanent restriction, it would either have to purchase a property or require that the property owner agree to have some entity like a land trust or conservation commission hold the restriction on the property, because someone has to manage it, and it can't be the same person that actually owns the property. It's sort of checks and balances that have to come into play. So with respect to Armstrong Kelly Park, my recommendation would be that we do a recreation restriction that's not under Chapter 184, because we can't, because it wasn't purchased with those kind of funds. And if they'll agree to 30 years, then that's what we should require. The committee can also decide not to grant them the money if it feels strongly that the recreation restriction should be a component of it and should be for longer than 30 years.
Okay. Questions, members?
I have a question.
Certainly.
Thank you for that explanation. That was really helpful. My question is, could we also put a stipulation that, like, with prior, if there were for any reason prior to the 30 years coming due, that, like, if they decided that they no longer wanted to manage this property and wanted to sell it, or they were no longer going to be the entity to manage it, that either we would receive the CPC funds back prorated, or does that get too messy? Like, what if in 10 years the trustees decides they no longer want Johnny Kelly Park? What happens? Not Johnny Kelly, Armstrong Kelly, sorry. What do we do then?
We could certainly negotiate something to that effect with them if we're going to agree to enter into a 30-year restriction. If they agree to the 30-year restriction, but for some reason, I think that's perfectly reasonable. If for some reason they decide in 10 years that they don't want to go forward, then yeah, we could put in a prorate refund or some such provision.
Thank you.
Thanks. I have a question on those prorated funds. Are those, do you calculate like in other words, do they have to pay back in value of the current time, accounting for inflation? In other words, $10 today, we give them $10. Do they have to give us the equivalent return, 20 years later?
That I don't know. This is where we're getting into finance, and I think that I would have to talk with our director of finance to get more of an understanding of what we would even do with funds if we granted funds, and then I'm sure we could accept them back, but I don't know the mechanics of how much we would take, whether it would, whether a prorated share would take into account inflation. I don't know. That's something that I think we should talk to Mark Milne about.
I think it would just go back into the CPC fund from whence it came.
Yeah, it would likely just go back into your fund. But as far as
Right.
Can we, how do we figure out 10 years? Do we just take 2/3 of the money that they didn't use? I'm not sure how we would calculate that. but I'm sure there's some reasonable mechanism.
The housing restrictions have a prorated kind of return too. And I don't know what it is offhand because I don't have a legal mind, but that might be some guideline, what the percentages are.
Okay, I'll take a look at that.
Okay. Farley,
Yeah, I was just wondering, is this a all or nothing kind of proposition right now? Is if they do not agree to a 30-year agreement, is that the end of the deal, or can we negotiate with them for a shorter period of time, or how does that work?
You could do a shorter period of time if that was something the committee was interested in, but it couldn't be longer than 30 years.
No longer than. Okay. Thank you.
I didn't look up how much we gave them. Could you remind me how much money we granted them?
I believe it was 286,000. Not small money. And recreation seems to be the only real outlier we have. The rest of them seem to, be well worn and well worked, but recreation is not. And I don't think, frankly, from my opinion, the money's any different no matter where it's going. I'm disappointed that the statutes don't allow for acquiring an interest in the public use of a property. Frankly, I think that's if you're acquiring a permanent use of the property, I would think that fits, but I guess I'm wrong.
Well,
Can
I
you
don't
put
think
an
they've
auto
gotten there yet.
renewal in for like $1 after 30 years? I mean, can you do 30 years for the 286 and then a renewal for $1 30 years from now?
Why?
I'm not
But
sure
then
that
have
would work.
30 years on top of.
Interesting question.
I'd have to see if that's ever been done, but I don't read the statute as allowing for that, but it's something we could look into.
See, I don't see any difference here between a historic restriction, and I know it's in the statute that way, and a recreation restriction. They say, oh, things wear out. Well, roofs wear out and shingles wear out, but yet we still have a restriction in perpetuity. The housing restriction, houses need repair. We may have to go back in someday and pay to fix them up, but we still got that restriction forever. So I had always considered acquiring public access to a private property as acquiring an interest in real estate. And it should be afforded the exact same conditions as all the others. The one thing that bothers me, and I know members have mentioned it, we get too many rules floating around. We forget them. There's different rules for different projects. That just makes it crazy, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Deb, you had something?
No, I just agree. I think it's public money. We have a public trust to keep. And no matter how much money we give, it's got to be a public, it's important.
Anyone else on this one? Anyone sensing any kind of motion? Catherine, did you raise your hand there? No?
Sure. Okay. So I just want to make sure that I'm clear on what we're asking for. We're asking for a recreation restriction for Armstrong Kelly Park that would fall within 30 years with added stipulation that if they choose to withdraw from ownership within that 30 years, that we receive a prorated amount of the funding back. And am I covering it here?
Yeah, I think that's pretty good if you want to vote for it at all.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, that sounds like a perfectly fine motion, but I do have to ask, because I don't recall, did the committee vote to give them money previously? Or was it just discussions that then led to this discussion of imposing a restriction? So I just don't know what the history was. It sounds like you already voted to grant the money.
I would have to fall back to Ellen if she's got something handy.
Because if that's the case, then this motion needs to acknowledge that there was a previous vote and now we're voting something slightly different.
We would have to check.
I think we approved it, which is what started this whole thing, right, Ellen?
I'm not sure that we did. I
Oh.
honestly think that we were waiting for final.
Mm.
I mean, it was a long time ago. We started this conversation. It feels like a
that's
really
right.
long
Last
time ago.
year.
Yeah, you're right. It was last summer, and I don't know if we did it contingent upon agreement of a recreation restriction, we were calling it at the time, or recreation easement.
Yeah,
I can't remember.
I think we said restriction because that's what we expect with the money.
Right.
But, I mean, maybe I don't know.
Well, just to go back, the reason I wrote up the list of this with restriction, let's just call them all the same. You start using different terms like
Yeah.
recreation easement or any of that, preservation restriction, for historic. So we'll call them all historic restriction or recreation restriction. We'll keep it simple.
Lindsay, if I may.
Yes.
Going back in your minutes of July 18th of 2022, this item was under, it was a revised application. And it's confirmed that if the property were to change hands, all of this is in the minutes of that meeting. And they came back representing the total cost of the project. And they were talking about matching funds, and they requested $286,866. It doesn't say, let's see, there was discussion, public comment, but I don't see anything about a vote being taken.
No.
Okay.
So we should wrap the whole thing into one big vote then, I think. Approving the funding and the restriction.
I think it's also, I think the applicant should be, made aware of the vote.
We did take a vote. I'm seeing.
Is it on there?
Hold on. I have the meeting minutes from November 21st,
Okay, so
2022, stating that. Hold on. Motion of Deb Converse was seconded by James Tenaglia to recommend through the town manager the trustees a reservation application for $286,866 in community preservation recreation funds for a new children's play area and renovation of the existing pathways to meet ADA regulations in Armstrong Kelly Park, Osterville, with a recreation restriction required to be executed. Roll call vote. 6 yeses, 0 noes. And the motion carried.
you're right. Yep. Good,
Excellent, Catherine.
good.
Great work. So there we have it. So we just need to,
So,
go ahead.
sorry
Kate.
if I may, Mr. Chairman. So it was voted by CPC, and then, and forgive me that my memory is eluding me on this. Did we then have a town council vote?
It hasn't gone to council yet.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I don't recall that it did because I would have
No.
reviewed it.
Mm-mm.
Okay,
I
so we
think
need to,
They
So that
came
was
back then
helpful.
with we don't want a perpetual restriction.
right. And that's when they hired an attorney, and that's when this
Yeah,
all
which
started.
is a little over the top, but my own opinion.
So in
Okay.
that motion, according to the minutes, though, it doesn't say anything about perpetual restriction. It just says recreation restriction.
Right.
So at this point, the motion that needs to be made is that the Barnstable Community Preservation Committee votes to approve a recreational restriction on Armstrong Kelly Park that would fall within a 30-year time period.
I would say that is limited to 30 years.
That is
Or
limited to
for
30.
the period of 30 years.
Okay,
Because you
but
don't want to make it vague as to whether it's less than 30 years.
limited to 30 years with the stipulation that if trustees of reservation withdraw ownership of Armstrong Kelly Park prior to that 30 years, that Community Preservation Committee will receive prorated funds back from that organization.
Correct. And I would just throw into the beginning of your motion, if I may, that this is an updated motion from the vote that was taken on
November
November
21st.
21st of 2022.
I should be writing this down.
And the reason for this is, as we discussed, they came back and objected to the recreation restriction period of time and hired an attorney to negotiate it with me. So you're not changing your previous vote. You're just responding to their concern with tonight's vote.
Okay.
Okay. Should we add anything about the maintenance of this facility? We have signage and play areas and play things. Do we?
I don't think you need to add that to this motion. Those are terms that we can put in the draft. I mean, we have many of them in the draft restriction already. The only thing that their attorney called me to complain about was, based on their concerns, was the time period. They didn't have any issue with the putting up signage saying that they had been granted these funds from the Barnstable CPC. They had no problem with any of that. So I don't think that's part of this vote.
I share your concern, Kate, that the play areas really need to be defined. You know, they're these naturalistic play areas that involve logs and different things with the kids playing in nature. And the signage really needs to be maintained to tell it what it is. So we can work that out in the actual restriction.
Yeah, and for the rest of the members, Lindsay and I have had this discussion because their proposal I thought was really vague. And when my children were little, I took them to parks and places like this, and it's a beautiful area. But I would be telling my children to get off of that, stop climbing on that. Unless it was a sign that said this is a children's play area, I would be restricting my children from trying to play on it, because the way they have it, you can't tell it's a play area. It's just it's supposed to be creative and, you know, wonderful ideas, but unless they have signs saying children may play here or instructions on what to do with the water areas or, you know, whatever it is they're going to have, they need to let people know that it is a play area and you're allowed to let your children in there.
Excellent. All right. Are we okay on the motion right now to move forward?
Do I need to say it again?
No.
Okay, great.
I would ask the town attorney on that. Are we comfortable with the motion, Kate, the way it was read?
I am. Does everybody think they understand? We're updating the November 21st, 2022 motion to grant fundings with a recreation restriction to address the concern of the trustees with the time period of the restriction. And we're going to have a restriction, require them to sign a restriction that's for 30 years with the caveat that if they cease the project or project ownership before the 30 years is over, then we'll seek a refund of the money that's granted to them.
With interest to be determined. Okay, everyone clear? All right, seeing that, was there a second?
I'll second for Catherine's bravery, trying to make the motion.
Moved and seconded on the motion. I'll call the roll. Terry Duenas?
Yes.
Marilyn Fifield?
Yes.
Deb Converse?
Yes.
Catherine Garofoli?
Yes.
Tom Lee is recused. Farley Lewis?
Yes.
Stephen Robichaud?
Yes.
James Tenalia?
Yes.
Lindsay Council votes yes. Unanimous. Great work, everyone. Kate, thanks for coming in. Great to see you.
My pleasure.
And,
Good to see all of you.
And we'll
You don't
work
need
out
me for the rest.
details.
Sorry, you don't need me for the rest of the agenda, I assume.
I don't believe so.
Text me if something comes up. I'm around.
Okay. No, I think
All
we're
right.
good.
Have a good evening, all of you. Good to see you.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Lee can rejoin the meeting. There he is. All right. We got the full crew. Next item on the agenda is approval of the draft Community Preservation Committee regular meeting minutes from February 27th, 2023. Everyone have a chance to go over those? Motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Second? Do we have a second already? Did I not hear it?
Tom said.
Okay, Tom seconded.
Mhm.
Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the roll. Terry Duenas?
Abstain.
Ah, yes, that's right. Very good.
I'm sorry.
Marilyn Fifield?
Yes.
Deb Converse?
Yes, now that some things have been clarified.
Catherine Garofoli?
Yes.
Tom Lee?
Yes.
Barley Lewis?
Yes.
Stephen Robichaud?
Yes.
James Tenalia?
Yes.
Lindsay Council votes yes. Thank you very much. Moving on through the agenda. We received no letters of intent. We received no applications. Seems things are quieting down a little bit. Correspondence, we did receive the Community Preservation Fund schedule of unreserved balances by program area for March 2023. And we also received a letter dated February 27th. This was entered late in the last meeting, but letter to Mark Ellis from Ann Kennedy, copying the CPC regarding the unanimous vote to recommend consideration of a CPC funded purchase of an 18-acre vacant parcel at 2320 Meeting House Way, West Barnstable for water protection purposes. And I might as well update you on that right now. We have engaged an appraiser on that. And we are looking to engage a water resource specialist on that. And Deb, I wanted to ask you as well, you had mentioned the possibility of using a portion of that for community housing.
Yeah.
Is there, or do you know of someone who could serve the purpose of reviewing that? Are there people that do that?
Well, appraisers would do that. There's land appraisers should be able to tell you what the land is like. I mean, there is some affordable housing across the street in West Barnstable. So, yes, a land appraiser should be able to tell you that. I mean, I did kind of shake at the 18 acres. I'm thinking, oh my God, could a couple of acres be used for housing? But
well, I think this is a little more specialized in an appraisal, though, and for that very reason. There's wetlands, there's narrowness. The site's really narrow. I don't know if that's really an area for an appraisal. I was wondering if that might be more in the line of an engineer creating like a subdivision.
Yeah, engineering would be probably the best. I just always think appraisers know that stuff, but they don't.
Know it, but where you're getting into wetlands delineations, that gets tough.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Tom, have you ever had any experience with reviewing a parcel for that type of thing?
No, I don't.
All right.
Could we hire an engineer for that, just like the appraiser? I mean, that's
certainly
pretty common thing.
I can get the information to you maybe from Lori at the Housing Authority, because we are currently looking at a couple of pieces of property that we own to develop on. So
that'd be great if you could get back to me.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
The other thing is that this, if I may say, that this brought up now that all the water departments seem to be coming to ask for money to save some of the land. I meant to go online and look up under whatever land values, but how much property the water departments may own now, if any? Because I know where we are in Katuitt, there's a lot of land that's set aside for the water department, which is good. And Centerville, I'm familiar with that too, but I don't know West Barnstable.
West Barnstable has no wells, so they have the one spot reserved behind the fire station for a future well. I don't
Oh.
think that well has been fully developed and whether that site would work. Katuitt I have talked to the folks over at Katuitt and they don't need new land.
No, I walk it. So I know they don't.
Right.
It's right down the street.
Hyannis Water has begun their investigation through the Department of Public Works.
Mm-hmm.
They need new land.
Mm-hmm.
COMM needs new land. They have a lot of land, but it's already maxed out. Let's see, what am I missing? And Barnstable Water is looking to partner with Hyannis Water. If they develop a supply and there's a possibility of some sharing, because Barnstable Village itself is quite limited for open land. I think Old Jail Lane might be about the only spot.
Yeah.
So if they were to come forward, again, these are the things you got to have an expert tell you because of all these groundwater models and this is what we get into. So
how much land you need for the population in the area, and Chris might know more.
Well, the general need from what I've heard, the number that's floating around is these districts all need another 1 million gallons production right away.
If I may, Lindsay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. It was Sam Wilson, the chair of the Hyannis Water Board, who spoke to the Land Acquisition and Preservation Committee, suggesting that these 18 acres be considered to augment the already protected conservation land in West Barnstable, because it happens to be of the, I think it was 6 or 7 sites that were evaluated in the first round by the engineering experts for potential future use, purchase for potential future municipal water supply wells. That these 18 acres that are adjacent to the conservation area is for sale. So it's available. It's also Chapter 61B property, which means if the process is followed correctly, that it would come to the town for first right of refusal, because it's got some relief in taxes due to it being under recreation, Chapter 61B. This parcel was also on a list developed by the Land Acquisition Preservation Committee back in 2015, when this committee visited each of the water districts in executive session because we were speaking on real estate. And it was one of those parcels targeted for possible, are on the wish list for possible future water uses. And it's Lindsay who said, I had a conversation with him, doesn't matter whether we're talking about the existing local comprehensive plan or the town's open space and recreation plan. The number one justification for purchasing open space is water, water, water. So anyways, this is a rare opportunity, and there's a couple of historical supports for consideration for this. Thank you for hearing me out.
You're welcome.
And I always have to use my affordable housing hat, because there's housing too. I mean, it's important, and obviously we need clean water, but if we don't have people or workers living here.
No, I understand. But in my estimation, there's a big spotlight on the town's comprehensive wastewater management plan. And I contend that foresight on securing future municipal water sites is just as important, the drinking water. So we're just not making any more land. You run out of these opportunities to scoop up the last few pieces, and we'll end up desalinating the ocean.
We did that in Falmouth.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Stephen.
So I think Chris answered my question, but that was what came to my mind was this is such a kind of rare opportunity when something this large comes on, and my thought was let's move quickly, but it's a town, so we all know that it doesn't quite move that quickly. But from what I'm understanding, there's the potential for the town having first right of refusal if somebody stepped up right now and made an offer and a private entity wanted to purchase this land, that the town would have an opportunity to have first right of refusal.
Yes, and I can't recall, perhaps Lindsay or one of you might know, do they have to respond in 60 or 90 days? I forgot. There is a time window. It's for the town to react or not once officially offered. And then it's supposed to, by prescription in the state, this is a state regulation or accommodation. It has to be presented not just to the town manager, but to the planning board, the conservation commission, and the town council. It's the legislative side of the house, not only the executive side of the house. So, and that's where there was a glitch when there was interest in the Centerville Cranberry Bog. That also had a Chapter 61A agricultural restriction, but it was presented to the town manager, but not to all the other prescribed regulating bodies, planning board, Concom, and town council.
Well, it's great to hear that that avenue is there. And just so I'm clear, the engineer that we all discussed, that was proposed to be hired by one of the water districts. Do I have that right?
No, we're hiring the districts. The
town.
The CPC will be hiring an expert to review this for its potential for production and protection.
Great. So CPC funds will be used for that. That's great. Okay.
Yeah.
And at some point, would we expect a letter of intent and then an application from a water district, or is that not how this would go?
Haven't got that far.
Yeah, don't know.
Okay.
Don't know.
Okay. All right.
And so that, I think 3 years ago or so, Hans Kaiser from the supervisor of the Hyannis Water Supply Division spoke to, I was at that time a water commissioner in West Barnstable, but he also spoke to the Barnstable water commissioners and said they're looking for new sources of water, primarily in the villages of Barnstable and West Barnstable along the moraine, because he said that's where the rain falls first and flows from. So he said, you don't want to put a well where water is flowing towards. You want to get it in its most pristine condition, if possible. So this is why they're looking at the West Barnstable Conservation Area. This is water that is expected to be piped to Hyannis.
Okay.
And also, I'm sorry, I should have said this. There are wetlands on that parcel, but anytime a well is sunk, the zone 1 is a 400-foot radius around that well. So it's that buffer zone that you have to accommodate as well. So by having these contiguous acres there, it gives another opportunity to draw another circle of 400 feet protection for a future potential well. That's as much as I know.
Okay. Anyone else on this? There's no action to be taken now. We're just getting our information together at this point.
Thank you for going to get an appraisal, because then, it's obviously has not yet been sold. So this would give a full professional information from which to work. I appreciate that.
Yes.
Lindsay, can we hire the engineer to study it for housing at the same time, or do we need to vote on that? Or
No, Deb had mentioned it at the last meeting that she wanted to have it looked at for housing. So everyone was in agreement at that time. Can't be used for a well. We ought to look at it for housing, or maybe a long, narrow piece. Maybe you could do both. So I didn't want to just cut that out.
I think it might be worth spending the money on the engineer up front, if it's $5,000 or $10,000 and we can find out. I would put the motion forward to hire an engineer to review this for housing if a well doesn't work, and or ideally if we could do both out of administrative funds to review this parcel in West Barnstable.
We can do a motion if you'd like, but
if we need one. If we don't need one, that's fine. But if we needed it, I would make that motion.
Keep that in mind. I'll just get to you, Lindsay, tomorrow with the name of a fellow that we've used.
Okay. Well, let's Jim, if you would do a motion to approve a thorough review, including water supply.
Yep, I would make
Open space.
a motion to make a thorough review of open space, water protection, and housing on the parcel in discussion in West Barnstable.
Is there a second?
I'll second. Steve
I'll
Overcross,
second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Anyone have any questions on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the roll. Terry Duenas,
Yes.
Marilyn Fifield,
Yes.
Deb Converse,
Yes.
Catherine Garofoli,
Yes.
Tom Lee,
Yes.
Farley Lewis,
Yes.
Stephen Robichaud,
yes.
James Tenalia,
Yes.
and Lindsay Council votes yes. That makes it official. Well done. Okay, that completes that one. Now we have some project updates. Tales of Cape Cod, their funding is now available. They've met the waiting period, so they are able to go forward. Phase 3 and 4 of the Cape Cod Rail Trail and the Unitarian Church of Barnstable CPC applications are included on the town council agenda, or were included for the 16th, and the hearings are scheduled for April 6th town council meeting. So we're on for those. The Osterville Recreation Playground CPC application is anticipated to be included on the April 6th town council agenda for first read, and the hearing is anticipated to be April 20th. So those are in the works. Anything I missed on that stuff? No? Okay. Next is a decision on the meeting format for April 24th. We're going to be able to continue forward for at least another year in the remote setting.
Oh, really?
I believe. And maybe Sarah has an update on that, if you're listening.
It has not been officially decided.
It hasn't been officially. That's from the governor, right?
I'm not sure where it still is right now, but I just know that it's not official yet.
Not
And
official. All
It's
right.
not official. I'll make sure Ellen get the word once it is.
Okay. Well, we're going to go. Would you like to continue in the Zoom meeting format going forward? Everyone okay
Sure.
with that? Or
Well, except for the annual meeting, we kind of wanted it to be live, right?
Yes. Well, we can discuss that next, and I'm psyched that
Okay.
you guys are working on that. But for April 24th, we're good with Zoom?
Yeah.
Yes.
Everyone okay?
Mhm.
All right, let's do that.
Lindsay,
Lindsay.
I do remember that there was a woman who had voiced some concern about people's accessibility to the meeting, and that the online format isn't necessarily accessible to everyone.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay.
Lindsay, just a piece of advice. Before the state government extend that COVID-19 exemptions for the open meeting law, I don't know whether you can vote for remote meeting.
Oh. Interesting.
You have to wait. You have to wait until, I think the expiration date is March 31st, the end of this month.
Well, let's just say then that we'll hold the meeting if allowed. Otherwise, we'll be in person,
Yeah,
and we'll let you know.
yeah.
I don't think we need a vote on that because, it's just a meeting format, but let's do it that way. We'll
I'm
let you
pretty
know
sure
as
they
soon as
actually
we
did
hear.
vote on it March 7th to extend it to 2025, was my understanding.
2025.
No, that's only the representative, not the Senate and the government and the governor.
The bill is on the governor's desk and has not been signed.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, stay tuned.
Yeah.
As Sarah said, she'll let us know and we'll get the word out well in advance. Annual meeting. We have our active committee digging away on how to do that. I'm thrilled.
Sure.
I like some of the initial ideas they tossed around, so let's have at it.
So Deb and I had a phone conversation about potential options and when dates and types of presenters what that would look like, and we came up with 2 dates that we would use as options for people's best availability. So we thought that June 5th or June 8th at 5:30 would be just early enough in the season that it won't be too crazy and hectic in the town, but then allow people that are still like freshly back to the Cape to participate with us if possible. And we picked out 2 dates because we would like to have a version of speakers to come in and make presentations. And so we were hoping that by offering 2 dates, one would work for someone. And so the different formats that we thought of, option 1 would be to invite somebody from the Community Preservation Coalition to make a presentation about the importance of CPC funds, and then have committee liaisons from this group give very brief overview of recently funded projects, and then have one grantee from each of our focus areas provide an impact statement, about 5 minutes, where they would talk about how important that funding was for their project. Option 2 is somewhat similar, but instead of inviting somebody from the coalition, we would ask a local elected official or former elected official to come and make a presentation about the importance of our committee and the importance of CPC funds in Barnstable. And then going through the same process where committee liaisons would give a short presentation, and then one grantee would come and make an impact statement. So love to hear people's feedback on that.
Members?
Well, I love the idea of having those impact statements, and I love the idea of having someone from the coalition speak. I think that it would just make it so much more engaging and dynamic. So I think that those are great ideas.
Thanks.
I would agree. I'd love to see like a report from the folks at the coalition of how we're stacking up, with other communities. I know we're right up there as being one of the very, very busiest, but with 214 communities out there, there's probably a lot we can learn from the coalition on how things operate and how best to go forward. I think that'd be fabulous. And it's absolutely, I think, a wonderful idea to maybe even get more than one, maybe one from each category in to give a 5-minute presentation on what a difference it made. One of the groups I think that would love to come is the Tales of Cape Cod folks. It has transformed that organization.
Yeah.
If you look at their last request, they had a big budget, for this project, and they've gotten a ton of donations. So I think something like that would be great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were one that we thought of, we liked, and then, we're open to recommendations from all the other categories. I mean, housing, really nothing has happened yet. And so are there other areas, historic, certainly. I think town hall is one of them, although we probably should stay away from town hall because it's pretty, incestuous kind of, but they've done a beautiful job on the stairways and the oak and stuff. But if people have historic, well, we've got Tales, recreation, if there's one that stands out that you would know, James, and land protection.
Land trust could certainly give us a breakdown of what we've done over the last few years with them. Yeah. And I think we could get the trust, the folks from the Affordable Housing Trust to give us an annual report, on their work for the previous year. So sure, we could get 4 good groups right in, no problem.
So I guess is it the general consensus that the group is liking the idea of inviting someone from the coalition?
I think we should. Stuart Saginaw is a very good speaker, and he's great when you listen to what he has to say.
Okay.
He's from the coalition.
We can contact him.
And then we're going to rely on the committee liaisons to find the right grantee to give a statement. And as long as the committee liaisons are feeling comfortable that they'll give a presentation about sort of like high level projects that we funded in the last, let's say, 5 years, and just like what the purpose of CPC funds is around that category, might be great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we have historic, again, we need recommendations, especially for recreation, and land trust, we know Janet, so.
Right.
Well, recreation, I'm sure we could get somebody from the Harbor Hawks over here to tell us what a difference that's made. I mean, that was, and this will be the first time I've ever used this correctly, a game changer for those folks. Really, it has. That field was awful.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they'd be glad to come.
Yeah.
One thing I did have to note, though, I cannot make it June 5th. So.
So we make the meeting June 8th?
8th, is that a regular date? I thought we moved up to, you want to have it like, that's like a Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I am just arriving back on the 8th, so I'm not available the 8th either. How about the 12th? Our regular meeting, a week early for our regular meeting.
So we were basing it off of some dates that Ellen provided about the room being open. Is that right, Ellen?
Yeah.
Yeah, the 12th is a planning board meeting.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because are we going to do a double thing? We're going to have a regular meeting and a annual meeting, or just do one meeting? It sounds like one meeting would be enough.
Yeah.
With this format.
We wanted the other thing, the little twist I think we talked about is having food available for people, food and drinks, not alcoholic drinks, but drinks. So there's that too.
Well, perhaps we send Ellen back to the calendar and she can let you all know some dates after the 8th. That would work. How about that?
Okay.
Because I think we do need a room. You know, we don't want to have Steve rushing off to another meeting. You know, stuff like that. So let's not, it doesn't have to be a Monday. We just want a room, and probably not a town council meeting night either. So Jessica can. So I don't
Ellen,
know
can you help us with that?
We can look through the dates she sent us too. I came across them the other day. So anytime after June 12th. The date she gave us would be without planning board and without town council.
Right.
That's right.
I think we can go back to what she sent.
So I'm seeing June 21st or June 22nd. That's a Wednesday and a Thursday.
Yeah.
So maybe we should plan for June 21st and June 22nd.
And give Stuart a choice.
If I may, would it open up some options if the adult community center was available for a meeting? I mean, they have a kitchen if you plan to have food.
Well, we weren't going to make the food. Trust me.
I think it has to be in a place. I think this has to be held. It's a public hearing, and I think it has to be held in a place where it can be recorded and publicized.
Okay, I know that they record meetings at the senior center.
Do they?
Yeah, they do.
The Shellfish
We can
Committee.
look into it.
And I know the local comprehensive planning committee had an event there in the evening. So I just thought it might give you options.
Yeah, as long as it can be recorded. Sarah would be able to tell us if it would meet the requirements for a public hearing.
All right, well, let's check on that. We've got time. We can finalize this at the April meeting. That way there are other places in town too that are also wired, I believe. So anyway, let's just see we'll have something for you for the April meeting. Okay. Sound okay?
Yeah.
All right. Great work, committee.
Okay, we wanted input though, so if you have any suggestions, call Catherine.
Lindsay,
All right.
if I could just remind you and Terry, your terms are expiring at the end of this fiscal year. And so the appointments committee would like to see your interest in reapplying for the positions that you now hold. Just a reminder.
Okay,
Great.
Yeah.
very good. What do you need? Just a quick letter?
Yeah,
Anything
just
we'd like to-
notify Cynthia that you
Yeah.
would like to stay on in your role.
She's usually good about letting us know.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Anything else for discussion? Thank you very much for that, Jessica. Anyone here from the public who'd like to speak? Seeing none. Any other general discussion for the folks? Anything?
Oh,
Like
I
to
wanted
see-
to ask something. How many
Sure.
years has this CPC been in operation?
Since 2006.
Okay,
We took over for the land bank in 2006.
right, okay.
So it's
Okay,
been a while.
yeah, I know.
And actually, Ellen's working on updating all of our fact sheets for projects, so we can get that done out to you guys. And maybe we can build some graphics around that by category and
Mm,
stuff like that.
yeah, that would be nice. We were supposed to have something on finance for today, for this meeting, right?
Yes, we didn't make it because we aren't finished with that. You wanted pie charts and
Yeah.
all that good stuff, so we could use this as an opportunity to start building that,
Yeah,
and then
good.
maybe come up with some nice graphics for the annual meeting.
Okay,
Because
yeah.
we'll be close to our year end then too, so it'll be a
Yeah.
good time to wrap all that in.
yeah. And
Anyone
so-
else?
Yeah.
Anyone else? Comments, questions? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Moved and seconded to adjourn the meeting. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the roll. Terry Duenas,
Yes.
Marilyn Fifield,
Yes.
Deb Converse,
Yes.
Catherine Garofoli,
Yes.
Tom Lee,
Yes.
Farley Lewis,
Yes.
Stephen Robichaud,
Yes.
James Tenalia,
Yes.
and Lindsay Council votes yes. Thanks, folks. Good meeting.
Thank you.
Take
Thank you,
care.
Lindsay.
Thanks, Catherine.